Navigating an SAP transformation? We get it. By day, we work hands-on with people like you across the globe. By night, we share what actually works. Welcome to Transformation Every Day with Alexander Greb and Johannes Langguth, where your complex transformation becomes clear, actionable, and achievable.
Welcome everybody. My name is Alexander Greb, Consulting Director at CBS Corporate Business Solutions, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming an exceptional guest, Whynde Kuehn. Whynde is a globally recognized expert in business architecture, a trusted strategic advisor, and a best-selling author of books such as Strategy to Reality and The Execution Challenge. As a founder of S2E Transformation, she has supported numerous organizations worldwide in aligning their strategic visions with practical, impactful execution. I'm delighted to have her here today to discuss how business architecture can effectively bridge the gap between strategy and reality, and how organizations can achieve lasting success through thoughtful, intentional architecture. Let's get started.
But it made my heart very happy. That's
a good
great way to sum up
That's
yesterday. Head and heart.
And what makes me very happy is that we are recording.
Yes.
And we are here again in Newtown Square, the SAP Experience Center. And I'm here with Whynde Kuehn.
It is a pleasure and honor to be here with you.
That's awesome. We're talking about one of my, let's say it, topics of my heart. Because it's all about making things happen to turn strategy into reality. In my opinion, one of those things in the area where I am active, where we fail, I use that adjective word by heart, the most of the times, because this is what's missing most often, which is people who look at a topic, who look at an initiative, and for us it's SAP implementations, and do not combine it and link it with strategy, and as such rob it of its purpose.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And when we do it well, it's pretty magical to take really big ideas and get them into action well.
How did you get your life into action? What was the point when you said, like, hey, enterprise architecture, I'm interested in that? How does that happen?
Honestly, I am an accidental architect. So I am a science person, biology, chemistry. My master's is in sustainability. So
cool.
I am a big picture, systemic, analytical thinker. So I was going to be a veterinarian. That's where all of that comes from. But clearly that didn't work out. So, honestly, how I got into architecture was sort of from pioneering and creating it, not really finding it or getting interested in it, just doing it. For me, it started with a 3-month temp job, and I don't even know if it was called business architect, honestly. And then for 12 years, I just followed my bliss to leading bigger and bigger transformations, both business as well as cross-sector, multi-stakeholder, cross-organizational sort of transformations, which I still do today. Grew my own business architecture team to 100 people. And at some point in there, for me, it became really a personal mission and a life's work as it is today. So I guess architecture found me.
Is it really that this is the common way to become an architect, by accident? Because if I talk about myself, I had a similar situation because I did projects, I did implementations. I, for me, found topics where I thought this is so important. This is something that we should focus much more on, which is turning strategy into action, linking all the things we do, those technical exercises and services, to a strategy to deliver business value. And then one day when we were starting to talk about these kinds of words, business architecture, I found out, hey, I guess I'm one. Is this a normal way to do?
I love that you said it that way. It's absolutely normal. Actually, so many people I talk to, they do say that I was doing this and that got me into architecture, or just what you said, that I guess I've been doing architecture. I didn't know there was a name for it, or wow, this is actually my calling. I've even found many people at the end of their career that say, this is me, this is what I do, and I'm actually going to continue further in my career and extend my career because I love architecture. I'm actually an architect. So I think this is a common story.
But if this is driven by the urge of people to have purpose, then that's, on the other hand, a bad news for those who want to scale architects, because it means this is something which is not easy to teach, because you have to learn it by yourself. You have to make experiences. You have to make scars. Because enterprise architects, the good ones or business architects that I met in my life, they were all characterly matured people who had their share, who worked at the front lines, who had their scars. And that's what made them, what made them happen. On the other hand, if I want to scale, because you said like you had 100 architects, great. It's absolutely impossible to find that many even if you want to, because the market is such a high demand for those rare breed. And then how are we able to scale? Where do we find these people? How do we grow and foster them?
Yeah, excellent question. I think it's a combination of things, because you are right. Really good architects are experienced and they are passionate. These people actually care about making a difference. I find they're often unsung heroes working for change. But I think there are a couple of things we can do. One is creating the pathway for architects. And I know this because of having a large team. I had architects at all different levels and people newly pathing into the role. And it was being very deliberate about mentoring, kind of having everybody mentoring everybody and giving them real life experiences. And then, of course, there's a lot of things that we can do where, there's a difference between someone who might be doing more of the knowledge-based work and the essential data and the mapping that we need versus the person who's actually facilitating conversations with executive on, where we're going strategically and target state and things like that. So as we do that work, maybe with the knowledge base, we're able to sort of learn more, build foundation, and move up. So I think that's part of it. And I think the other part is I would just love to see architectural thinking as part of the way we do business. And that starts with business schools. That starts with all degrees, honestly, so that we're thinking architecturally, systemically, so that there's not such a stark difference between people who are architects and think that way and people who don't.
Have there been some events or experiences that shaped or changed the way Whynde Kuehn sees architecture? Like you were at one time in your life, in your career, you followed a certain school of thought concerning architecture, but then found out, hey, I realized or I experienced these and those cases. I may have to modify my view on that a bit.
Yeah. I think a couple things. One is, and this was just me following my bliss, but actually leading transformations of massive scale, top to bottom. And you know how complex and big and fun they are, right? Living those definitely formed how I think. I mean, there's nothing I write about or talk about or do that I haven't done. That's really important to me from an integrity perspective. But just living that and knowing that large-scale transformation in an orchestrated way with an intentional design is possible, and knowing that it's possible to entirely change the way organizations execute from strategy to execution, hand in hand, all these teams working together. So those years and years and years of experience that continue today, that's a big part of it. Another part is maybe a little bit more personal, but there was a time that I went to my boss at the time and I said, I'm going to work 12 months and 9 months, and I'm going to go to Africa, and I focus on certain countries, Mozambique, for example, and I'm going to do pro bono there. And I also did sort of cross-continental work. So those experiences really shaped my perspective in architecture because in many cases I was working with social entrepreneurs and the scale was smaller. So I could really understand what a business model means, and it totally made me more practical about how to practice architecture. Because if you have an entrepreneur that's trying to make payroll next week, like all the big ideas, like it really has to be practical and focus on outcomes. So that really shaped me. And then honestly, just from very different cultures, really shaped who I am and how I lead. You know, I'm American born. I live in Norway now, but seeing African leadership really changed me in ways that I appreciate.
I believe that. Let's imagine I'm now the grumpy CEO that you meet, and this CEO, as many have, has its issues with that architecture word, because we experience quite often something like a Babylonian language confusion concerning the meaning of architecture. It's quite easy to call somebody, I'm an architecture. Yeah, I'm an architect, sorry, and doing architecture. And you have the solution architects, you have the business architects, you have the enterprise architects. He says like, hey, I have two architects, but they are solution architects, and they're doing great technical services and so on. Why do I need you? Why is that relevant?
The business architect?
Yeah.
Because the business architect is the tie back to the strategy. It's the tie back to the bigger why. It's the business context for all of those solutions. And it can guide us to even make sure we're doing the right solutions in the first place. It's business architecture is also what connects us back to all of the people and the process side of that change as well. It really is the place where we do integrated design, people, process, technology, and it is the place where we create the golden thread from strategy to execution, especially as strategy changes, and that may ripple through later to impact those solutions and those initiatives.
So are there simple exercises companies can do to improve that alignment that you're talking about, but without a full-scale architectural project? To have something like the first step into this kind of world, which lowers resistance, which gives them a first taste of the fruit.
We have to be practical, right?
Yeah.
So a really good place to start, honestly, is with an enterprise capability map.
Mm-hmm.
There are reference models that can help to speed up that process, but ideally, we want to invest a little bit of time for a cross-functional group of business people to create that, because that's our shared vocabulary, our shared mental model of the organization. And I think one of the best steps is put that capability lens onto the investment portfolio. It's not entirely back to strategy, but if we look at the portfolio of where we're investing or planning to invest, we can see how aligned is it to strategy? Mm-hmm. Do we have any duplications? Do we have any conflicts? Do we have any philosophical issues? And that not only delivers immediate value for the portfolio, but it helps people understand, wait, hold on, actually, we need to think about what we're doing upfront and what we're putting into this portfolio. So it just gets people thinking about the art of the possible as well.
My favorite analogy concerning the importance of enterprise and business architecture is, if you do not have this kind of thoughts, and if you do not have an enterprise architect a business architect who works as a glue, you're like constantly running with a handbrake pulled. Do you have examples, anecdotes, stories about companies who were suffering for a long time from exactly this pulled handbrake, wondered, hey, why I'm not moving forward? And I have had so many initiatives which led to nowhere because there was no fit. And then they started that kind of school of thinking, and that made the handbrake go down and release this kind of power that happens when everything is aligned and suddenly it works.
I feel like a lot of organizations are actually in that position. I like your analogy of the handbrake, because it's like we're all working so hard. We're just moving faster. We're doing more. And I think some of this is actually manifested in the statistics we see around strategy execution or transformation failure. It's like we're doing more to get less, and we're still moving forward, but it does feel like we have that handbrake on. So this is something I find with a lot of organizations. They usually articulate a number of different symptoms. It could be, we have this big, initiative that we're doing. It's a pet project, and we've been doing it for this many years, but we know it's not exactly aligned. Or we may have we build the same thing multiple times, or we have all these sort of conflicting, non-integrated solutions that are really adding up to a poor customer experience. Like, you have all these symptoms, right? But where those symptoms are born, they may manifest in execution, and we usually label them as execution challenges, but they're born upstream by what we do or don't do when we don't collectively architect our change. And the truth is, we can head many of them off from ever happening in the first place. And to me, that releases the handbrake, right? So you're not continuing to accrue that tech debt. So, to really bring it to examples for organizations, I find people come to this idea in different ways because it's a really big elephant to eat.
Yeah.
And
that's what so many hinders from starting it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so some will recognize a comprehensive set of strategy execution challenges and actually do an assessment and say, okay, we actually want to streamline and think totally different, and actually let's put an end-to-end process with end-to-end accountability for strategy to execution. Others will take parts of it. As we were talking before, they'll start by looking at the portfolio, because that's a good place. And yet others will, this takes some maturity, but they'll start doing a transformation or maybe a strategy refresh with the holistic approach, where they don't skip over the second stage. They actually architect collectively, they architect the change, and then that shapes the work differently to head off those issues downstage. So, again, everybody's on a different journey, and there's different places to start, but those are some common places.
When somebody would put a pistol at you, say, where do I feel this kind of change? When is the moment I feel that change happening, that the things are going better? Can you refer to some boring KPIs, to say like, hey, listen, this number changes, it goes up. That shows that what we're doing works. Are there some KPIs you can hint these certain personas to? Because it always happens that when you have a CEO who is measured for this and a CFO who is measured for that, and you can show this KPI, they are immediately your friend.
I think there are many examples, but let me share a few. One is just a reduction in redundancy by capability. For example, application enablement is maybe a good one there. Another KPI is the percentage of the portfolio that's aligned back to strategy. You would think that's always 100%, but if we're honest, what is it really?
It's not.
Yep.
Yeah.
And another one is time to. So I'll kind of let, companies can kind of bound that, but time from, the defined strategy to, shaped initiatives, or, time from an innovation idea to, certain parts in the life cycle. That time to can reduce as well. Now, the other thing, and actually I used to have a gentleman with a PhD that was on my team trying to track these things. You can also track downstream things. It's harder because you have a lot more factors and variables that are influencing it. But you could also look at scope changes. You can look at defects and things like that. And we used to have real data around that said, with architecture, you have you have less of those things. And without it, you're actually going to see more. So all of those are some key KPIs, I think, as well as just business stakeholder feedback. I'm a big fan of just capturing surveys and capturing that voice as well. And, people can articulate, we have clarity, or we never had it before, or I didn't realize that this part of the organization did the same thing we did too. So there's a lot of intangibles that we can try to make tangible.
Is there a right moment / a wrong moment to start with that? Because when you talk with customers and so on, you quite often hear, it's not the right moment to start a big thing like that. We have now either a boom time. We are so focused on getting stuff out of our warehouses, no time for anything else. Or the times are so bad, we really have to cut down on budget, and we want to wait to see how things are going. Are there right and wrong times to start there, or where would be the best moment to start exactly that?
So we'll say introducing architecture, or I'll say introducing business architecture. Really good moments are when organizations are doing transformational things and they're hungry to think differently, or if you have leaders that like to think differently and try new things, especially when you need to work across different areas of the business, which we almost always do, of course. So those are really good. I have to say also, the reason behind transformations can be very compelling. Customer is often really good.
Yeah.
Because we have to show up as one company to a customer, and we just have to get over ourselves and our silos to be able to show up that way so the customer can unite us. And I have to say, I've seen good moments to start business architecture anyway, when we had serious issues like compliance issues, because those are very good teeth to give, transparency and context and look at things differently.
And there's no argument against that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't think there's ever a bad moment. I only think there are bad approaches. And so my approach to introducing business architecture, tip of the spear for enterprise architecture, it's always honestly very value-focused and practical. So I never come in and say, you just need to do all this mapping. And I don't lead with the architecture. I lead with the why. So for every company, it's about, listen, business architecture is a Swiss Army knife, can do all these things. What challenge are we trying to solve? What opportunity do we have? Let's leverage business architecture for that. And by the way, that's also how we're literally tailing our KPIs, because they're related to solving that thing. And then we build the business architecture just enough, just in time to be able to deliver on that. And then we grow and deliver bigger and bigger things over time, mature the practice, mature the knowledge base. So keeping it practical, there's never not a time to do this.
Fun fact, I experience at the moment an industry where this is exactly happening, what you're telling. Because, for example, the automotive suppliers, especially in Europe, they are quite in a transformation because they want to move away, because automotive is seen by many analysts and so on as an almost, I'm overdo a little bit, but almost toxic industry at the moment. Yeah, they are under heavy pressure, so they try to move away, which leads to mergers and acquisitions. You get new organizations with you. They have their own systems and their own enterprise architectures coming in with them. And what they are up to works only at that moment when they engage in enterprise architecture and business architecture activities. Because beforehand, you do not have any joint value that scales.
Right. I think you're absolutely spot on. And even to your point about acquisitions, that's definitely another pressure point to need to integrate and use these techniques.
Yeah, because you're not one company before exactly that has happened.
Exactly. It's a good excuse. It's another impetus.
What would be red cards for you, or the death proof things that, your approach there is not really working out? What are the, if you would call it, top 3 signs that, we have to improve that way? That's how you start there. So not the why, but the how. That's not really working out for you.
Well, I think that's my biggest red card. There's a lot of bias towards action. And we're often incented for it, and it feels good. So red card is we are already putting together the implementation teams and implementing stuff and planning work. We don't really have a clear idea of where we're going. I mean, I am just thinking about an example now of just a company hiring massive consultants, totally rallying the entire IT department. they were hiring so many people, it was literally changing the flight plans in the city, but yet not having a clear direction. That was a big red flag. It's in the same vein, but when people have decided initiatives or solutions that are based on their siloed budget or needs or focus without really understanding applicability or relevance to the enterprise, again, that to me is a big red flag. And I'll also say another red flag where we maybe are a little myopic in automating or implementing something when we haven't first said, do we need to reimagine our business first? Especially with technology. This is a moment, as we know, not just to automate, but to reinvent our business models and leverage technology in strategic ways that could have us fundamentally rethink what we do and how we do it. So not having that strategic thought first before we just go and leverage technology for what we know it can do.
Where in organization then should a business architect then position? Where does this happen? Is he a report to the CEO or more to the CFO, because he is the one who has probably the best interest in getting the KPIs right? Where should I position these people?
Very astute question and recommendations there. So we've seen a trend of business architecture teams around the world for many years now. This is a long time. That they're reporting to business leaders. They can report to different business leaders. Like we do see them report into CFOs. And as you mentioned, that's a really good place for accountability and teeth. I would say we don't see them there as much. I think a good place for them, and where we see many of them, is within strategy and transformation. Because those leaders care about two important things. One, full idea to action. Second, working across, different silos in the organizations. They have to do both of those things to be successful. And the business architecture value proposition really speaks to those things. So it's not the only place, like I said, in the business, but they're pretty natural because we are focused on change. But having said that, depending on how an organization is leveraging business architecture, they may be best under different, C-suite leaders. So it kind of just depends.
Okay, so we have now our alignment. We have our enterprise architects positioned, and the consultants are working. We want to start, or we are starting. How do we ensure that this architecture work actually leads to tangible outcomes rather than becoming an academic exercise?
It is all about the approach. That is, lead with value, build as you go. The entire business architecture practice, the entire team should be thinking about nothing but outcomes. Honestly, at the end of the day, and I always joke that there's a secret about business architecture, and it's not about the business architecture. At the end of the day, the business architecture is in support of those greater outcomes. So it is literally having it as our relentless North Star. Whatever our value proposition is to the organization, whatever scenarios we're delivering on right now, it could be as large as a transformation or it could be something smaller. It is delivering those services, delivering those outcomes, building the business architecture just enough, just in time, testing it, learning, getting feedback from the people that we're serving, and evolving what we do. The other part too is just the deepest of relationships. It's building partnership with all the other teams. It's building rock solid partnership with whatever people in the business or technology that we're serving. It's so much down to the human level. As I always say, the success of a business architecture team is not perfect knowledge base and maps. That's table stakes. But what changes things is value delivery, relationships, and then business sponsorship is the rocket fuel for it all.
But that points at an issue that I see in so many initiatives, and how, for example, also like consulting companies are set up. Because the self-image so many of them have, of us have, I have to say it like this, I'm in this industry. They see themselves rather as an executioner of a technical exercise than the deliverable of something of like a result. And you see that the moment when somebody calls what he does services, then you know, damn, that goes south. Are there some frameworks from your perspectives or some methods to keep this kind of bad habit coming up? Like, hey, I'm working hard. I'm doing what I can, yeah, and the focus is more on the things that you do instead of the things that you result.
Yes. I mean, other than how we literally our ways of working and thinking, right, as architecture teams. But I think some of these, like let's talk about sort of the consulting dynamic. I personally believe, and I'm a consultant too, right? But I have a lot of conviction that I'm building capacity in organizations because at the end of the day, I feel that strategy formulation and architecture, those are internal functions. Of course, we can bolster those and help those, but I think they're best done internally, and I think they're very competitive functions. So that muscle needs to be there within an organization. So I think as consultants, we need to help incubate or support those functions if they're not in place. And I think the frameworks and the approaches that we choose are tremendously important. So if you kind of think about this, lead with value, build as you go, what is working at odds with that is consulting frameworks that put a part of the business on a page for some initiative. Everybody locks onto it. And then now that's working against the maybe business architects that are trying to say, no, we need an enterprise view. We need an enterprise view. This needs to be stewarded. So I think if we're architects in an organization, we need to be accountable to outcomes. There's just no other way to think about it. And if we are consultants, I think we need to be mindful that there's an ecosystem of value that we can all work together, but we need to help organizations build their own internal capacity. And we also need to respect the teams that are in place and work with them as well.
An enterprise architect probably will work a lot with his brain, but he should probably not come without tools and technologies which help him to scale and to achieve what he's up to. I guess PowerPoint, if that's the only tool he has, is not the best idea. What else should be in his toolbox?
Yeah. So architecture tools, frameworks, toolbox. The knowledge base, we'll start with that. So there's method around that. Organizations use different things. I'm a Business Architecture Guild co-founder, so I believe in the business architecture domains and relationships that have been defined there. I think it's a rock solid starting place. And also the knowledge base, the actual tool behind that, because as you mentioned, we may start with VEP, Visio, Excel, and PowerPoint, but what we're really doing is helping to create data-driven decisions from strategy to execution and everything in between, right? So that needs to be in good tooling. And I believe that tooling should be for everybody because the architecture is for everybody, not just the architect. So that's an important part of how we approach this and that tooling. And then I think the other part of the framework or the methods is what I'll call a playbook. And, there's some prescriptive things we can do and bring, but these ultimately get adapted for organizations. And the obvious part of that toolbook is from strategy to execution, those 5 stages, whatever it equates to in an organization. What do architects do to inform strategy, translate it, shape work? But all the other teams working together, because it takes a village, right, to execute strategy. So, architects may start with strategy to execution as part of their playbook, and then hopefully that takes on a broader scope for the rest of the organization. In addition, if they're doing other things like acquisitions, right? And, informing due diligence, integrating their playbook is around that. It's around, what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve? What are the, key steps we perform? What do we create? What are sort of principles. I think principles is a big part of the architecture framework that we need to bring. And those aren't just architecture principles. Those also flow into business decision-making, so that the business and business leaders can steer through the architecture as well. So that collection of things from the knowledge base and what's in it, the tooling, the how we actually work in the playbook, the principles, I think those are some core components.
Where on that journey are the high-risk moments? Because many may think that, of course, the high risk is the start, because if you do not set it up correctly, that journey may go into the complete wrong direction. You may meet the icebergs and so on that bring the ship down. But from where I come from, the most enterprise and business architecture initiatives that failed at that point, when it was at that moment when basically the concept was done. You knew what it was out. You did your homework. Everything was correctly, and you had your definitions and maybe the capabilities defined, what you're up to, and everything was fine. And then it was the point to make this happen. And how do you usually make this happen? With an enterprise solution, with an application, with defined processes in those applications that then turn that into reality. What, in your opinion, are the best practices to take sure that at that moment, when basically the more business-minded people may get quieter and the more IT-minded people get louder, nothing in the end is missed in this transition?
I do agree with you, and where that really tricky point is.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, we got everybody on board. We're going to do this now. We have to deliver.
Yeah.
I think having the right talent on the team is important, because we were talking earlier about, building teams and, different levels, different skills, different experiences, but you really kind of do need someone who's been up this mountain to be able to start architecting and really delivering on stuff. So I think having the right talent is important at that stage to, make sure things go well. I also think it really comes down to the human stuff at this point. So, well, first of all, we got to deliver and continuously deliver. So it's not good to pick one of our earlier efforts that takes 3 years, because everyone, oh gosh, this architecture stuff takes so long. So it's like continual wins, continual value delivery, even alongside of doing longer stuff. And telling the story. This is where I say it's so human. You got to share with people, digital, in person, just tell the stories. Get business people to be your advocate that are next to you telling those stories and advocating for you. And so it's almost like it's the marketecture part of it, right? That becomes really important. And the relationship building becomes really important. The other thing that can, I find, be disruptive is once architecture gains traction, it draws other people out that may feel threatened. Could be even other like design disciplines. Yeah. And so again, it's important to never even let that come to the surface. Have conversations with them, be partnering, talking about how you deliver things together, how you co-create value, how you can help them, how you make them more successful, how you can bring them in on things. Because a competing team, I've literally had other competing teams, their leader and the business architecture leader going to executives saying like, who can deliver better on a certain business challenge. So just head that off before it ever happens. Just build the advocates, tell the stories, and just be really humble about where we can keep getting better as we go. And then, like I said, having the talent to allow us to keep doing bigger things and mentoring the team.
We're here in a place that oozes technology basically out of every gap in the walls, and which is, in my opinion, a great thing, but also in many transformation initiatives, a problem, because technology is noisy and tends to be dominant over other topics, like the much more quiet and more more difficult point, which strategy delivers. How do we get the right balance in our architectures between the loud and the not so loud voices?
Yeah, I think part of it is, as architects and when we're working in technology, we need to be proactive about making sure we're tied back to the business direction or asking the questions, asking the why. Because again, I think there's this tendency to go for bias towards action in solutions versus doing the real hard thinking up front. Strategy formulation is hard. It's hard thinking. And it also takes a lot of accountability because strategy is about choice.
Yeah.
And putting yourself out there to say, we're going to do this and we're not going to do all these other things and we're going to be measured by it. So I think it's both, if we're on the technology, if we're on the implementation side, we got to push back, we got to ask the right questions. But I think it's also organizations just need to really embrace the hard thinking up front that is strategy formulation and architecture, target state design, and also knowing, listen, especially in today's world, these things are fluid. They can keep adapting, but let's take a stand. Let's do the hard thinking, and let's evolve as we need, as the future goes.
So easily you can be lost in transformation in these kinds of initiatives. And it said that beauty lies in simplicity. And exactly that's what helps to avoid you being lost in transformation, to do something which goes into the wrong direction. How important is it to have a focus on simplicity? Is it the right way to do? Because you may hear voices like, we are a complex company. We have complex business and complex processes. How right is it? How correct is it to focus on simplicity? And how can you safeguard simplicity in that respect?
Some of this depends on simplicity where. Of course, our organizations are complex, but let's just start with direction. Mm-hmm. Direction shouldn't be so complicated that we can't understand it. And I also believe it should be transparent. It takes an entire organization to execute strategy, so it can't just be in a back room, and it can't just be in a fuzzy PowerPoint. It's got to be clear. And to your simplicity point, it's also letting the strategy manifest in other things like target state architectures that definitely should have a level of simplicity. Everything to me is layer of an onion, right? So you got to be able to describe simply where we're going, what it's going to look like, where we are today, how we're going to get there. And then as you go further along, you can get into a lot more of the details, but we simply can't overcomplicate the rest or we're actually going to get nowhere. But I also think helping people to see and feel what the future looks like. I've seen organizations do a really nice job. Sometimes they'll do it through customer personas and journeys or videos that really show the future so that we all see and feel and have that same idea. And then maybe to take this in another direction from an architectural perspective, of course it will depend on our operating model and strategy and things like that, but I think aiming for simplicity and using value streams and capabilities as a way to, building blocks to create simplicity of organization, at least so that we don't have unnecessary redundancy, I think is essential because that's not theoretical. Of course, it's costing a lot, but to me, it's the cost of change because when we want to change things, we don't want to do it 5 times and, have all this extra stuff to deal with. So I think simplicity is important for the big picture and as an architectural aim. And then let's not try to make the things that are really complex, let's let them be complex where they need to be.
Transformation and architecture is a journey. Do you think it is helpful to be tangible and to be transparent to those who have to live this kind of change, to start these initiatives first with the as-is state, drawing the as-is state? Or do you see a risk there that it may hinder change because people focus too far on what they're doing at the moment or the legacy processes they're living? Because I always say legacy processes are in most cases the strategy of 20 years ago implemented with the technology of 20 years ago. You would never do that again today if you were to do this at that moment. Or do you think it's better to start immediately with the picture of the future? Because that's where you get your head clean out of that past legacy thoughts, yeah, and focus much better. What's the right approach?
I think people have different ideas in their mind when they say as is. And I think a lot of people conjure up a lot of detail in the as is. Like, here's what and especially if we're talking about transformation that is truly transformational, metamorphic to a business, I don't know that we need to go into excruciating detail on any of those things. This gets back to layers of the onion, right? But so do I think we need a current state architecture across all the people, process, technology, information, experience dimensions? Yes, because otherwise we don't know what the delta is between where we are and where we're going to know how we're actually going to get there and what needs to change. But it shouldn't be, like I said, in a lot of detail. Yeah, no, I wouldn't do a whole bunch of process mapping for something that's a metamorphic change. So it's knowing that we're going to peel the layers of the onion. And depending on what that transformation is, it may be a whole lot of work up front to, for example, reimagine business model, reimagine our value network of how we work with other people. So, again, these are different blueprints and, thought processes that now haven't even touched any of the details. So some of it also depends on what we're doing. But yeah, peel the layer of the onion for sure.
Definitely. From my experience, companies are as different as people. They may have, let's say, similar capabilities, similar fears, similar strengths and weaknesses, but in the end, they are all different. There are those who are able to reinvent themselves surprisingly every few years, and they are successful in that, and others, they struggle heavily with even the slightest change. What do those companies where this seems so easy and so simple, what do they do different than the others? Is it just culture? And let me add already the second question to that. What can a single leader, what can he achieve in that? What can he do to make this happen and to make a company and an organization which may have their difficulties and change and the transformation being the other one that seemingly suddenly has no problems to achieve that?
I think it's an openness to, and it's an openness, an iterativeness, an energy to reimagine and redesign, I think is really different in companies. I work with a lot of organizations that don't really even have what I would call a strategy. It's just kind of like keeping the same stuff going, and it sounds like strategic priorities, but it's not really strategic. And especially in today's world that's changing so much and affording us so many opportunities, I think it's people that really are open to different business model, different products. And in some cases, of course, there are, maybe you don't want to disrupt the core, so you're spinning off other things. But I think it's just really in that space of being open and not letting the entire weight of an organization and how it's been drag you down. To some extent, you have a responsibility to think very critically about that going into the future, because that may or may not actually play out. So, so what can a leader do? I think there's a lot of leadership courage here, and I think a lot of things happen in baby steps. It's opening up conversations to reimagining or spending more time on these things versus some of the tactical stuff that we do, making space. And I think there are thought leaders or people we can hire into the organization that can really push our thinking and just being diligent about feeding ourselves with those things so that we're always reimagining and thinking differently.
So basically, it's those people who are sometimes the exotic folks with exotic way of thinking, which is so different, the exotic way of acting, and they may be like the tanker when he moves, pulls a lot of people behind them.
True. And that what is say, like, shoot for the moons, you might get the stars. So to your point, that exotic thinking, that sort of radical thinking can just unlock a lot of ideas. And maybe we don't go as far as we've brainstormed, but we can come back still to a different place.
We have been quite harsh to organizations in the last years, with rapid firing reasons to change and to transform, with because sustainability reasons, climate change, industries get disrupted, political stuff is happening, which complicates things quite a lot. I think we run and we see this with having in the end customers experience something like transformation fatigue, being tired, saying like, okay, but now for the next years, let's do it like this before we get again the next step. And to be honest, I was always also in the past the one who favored more the big transformation than the small transformation, because so often organizations rather jump too short than actually trying to jump too far. So you're better off with being more ambitious. Maybe I mellowed down a little bit also in that, preferring like a stepwise approach with plateaus. What is the right dose of transformation from your business architecture and enterprise architecture perspective?
I think the truth is we're just in continuous transformation. And many years ago when we weren't doing so much transformation and then it started, we felt the difference.
Yeah.
But the truth is, I think it's about, so the right dose of transformation is continual, as much as we need to do, but approaching it in a way that gives people all the balance that they need and the regenerating and the growth. I do think that organizing by capabilities and value streams as business building blocks can create a lot of efficiency and connection around transformation. Brings us together across business units. It gives leaders across business units ways to govern together. So I think that's a part of the way to manage the transformation, to organize it, to govern it, to also pace it over time. So you're, delivering these increments of value against capabilities. But I just think we got to embrace the continual transformation, organize it in the best way we can, and put the people first, because this is I think, just a new way of working.
To wrap this fantastically awesome conversation up, one last question. What, in your opinion, is a question in transformation and enterprise architecture and business architecture that is unfortunately not asked often enough, but should be?
I think, how do we get the entire organization first, the board and the executives? How do we get the entire organization and the leaders thinking architecturally and systemically? It's about so much more than the architects. This is embedded into the fabric of any successful organization, I believe. So, the question is, how can we all do this? How can we bring our leaders along to do it as well?
So it's basically about not doing the shortcut of saying like, listen, we will start this as a low-key initiative because we want to avoid that fuss with talking with the heavies, because the heavies then tend to mix things up and so on. So let's start first low-key. They will see the first differences and so on. It will be online with this. No, you say this is not a good idea.
Well, and I also think, honestly, these ideas, as I alluded earlier, they should be in business school. This shouldn't be something new that we're trying to teach people. They should be telling us to do it. They should be asking for the architecture.
One last question. Play Frankenstein. Build your perfect enterprise architecture. What kind of ingredients would you need, and in which parts of which would you put into that?
Frankenstein, I love it. So I have all the options. This is perfect.
Yeah.
This is perfect. Well, first of all, serious experience architecting transformations across the people, process, technology. Incredible communication skills, the best visualizations, compelling verbal and written communication, the ability to story tell to not only executives, but everybody in the organization, to really inspire them and help them see where we are actually going and how we're going to get there. The ability to have the empathy and care for people so that we're always bringing it back to the human side of the change. I always say architecture is sort of the hard side of change, but it's like the specifics we're doing. But there's all the human aspect of actually getting there. So yeah, I think that's my perfect architect.
Sounds like a hell of an expensive resource.
You allowed me to design my perfect, so I did.
Then it always gets expensive. But honestly, I fully agree with you, because I had, funnily today in the morning, I had somebody from my LinkedIn followership contacting me and asking for advice. And he's like, look, I'm doing a lot of migrations at the moment. I'm shifting data from left to right. What would you recommend me developing to? Should I continue to do this because this will be always needed? Yeah, or is there more where I can challenge myself and my brain? And to be honest, based on what I saw from him, what he's good at, and where he has maybe hidden talents and so on, I said, like, listen, enterprise architecture, that's definitely something where you will not get out of challenges, interesting stuff, work, possibilities for next decades up to come.
Love it. It's one of the most exciting roles, and we're a part of designing the future. Seriously.
Absolutely. Whynde, when people want to, not only to learn more about you, but to maybe listen or to read more about you, you wrote how many exciting books? I know of two.
Two books.
Two books. The one being Strategy to Reality.
Indeed.
The second one is quite fresh.
It is.
It's more about execution, I think.
Yeah, that one's called The Execution Challenge, and I co-authored that one with Brian Cameron, who's Associate Dean of the Business School at Penn State. And that one is on strategy to execution, and also talks about business architecture as an enabler, but more on the strategy execution side.
So now I guess people want to have more of Whynde. Where do they get more? Where can they follow you? Where can they get into contact with you?
Most certainly reach out on LinkedIn. I think that's a great way, as well as S2etransformation.com and also bizarchmastery.com. So BizArchMastery is sort of the place to go to get just loads of free resources. And there's a lot of programs that are the path to mastery, really the art and science of business architecture as well.
Fantastic. Whynde, thank you very much for the time you spent with me. It was very, very eye-opening in many cases. And I hope we will have the chance for a second part.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure and honor. All the best.
Thank you.